Confucianism. So, a long time ago, when I was just starting out, I wrote this article on Confucianism in Vietnam. And the whole point of the article was basically to say that we don't really know anything about Confucianism in Vietnam because the stuff that had been written by that point was basically based on information that doesn't really tell us about the presence or the influence of Confucianism. And, so my point was to say we don't really know anything, but we still aren't really getting at it. And so I keep getting frustrated. And, the one way I thought of explaining it is kind of like this. So to understand the role of Confucianism in Vietnamese history, you've got to be able to read texts that actually have information about that. But what scholars have done to date is to rely on the texts, or some of the texts that have been translated into modern Vietnamese from classical Chinese, which already takes like this much information that's out there and then limit it to this. And then by reading it in modern Vietnamese and Quoc Ngữ, it's like you're putting this filter on it that prevents you from seeing the textual connections to the Confucian text that exists before that point. So to give an example of what that's like, it's like this. So let's say we got a bag here, okay? And we're going to put a couple holes in it. I got scissors, so we go like, sorry, it's kind of, there we go, that one, and okay. And then so this is me seeing reality. And now I'm going to look at reality through the limited number of texts that have been translated from classical Chinese into modern Vietnamese. So now I'm looking at the world, and all I can, wait, I can't really see. Hold on, wait a second. Yeah, this is like, wait, ouch. Okay, I can see a little now. Okay, now this is, yeah, I can see some stuff. But then you can't get the connection between this and the stuff that was originally written in classical Chinese. So like I said, it's like you got a filter that you're putting, wait, ouch. Oh, it's gonna hurt my eye. Ow. Put this, come on, there we go. Get that one, there we go. There. I can't see shit anymore. Yeah, so you can't see anything anymore. And so Confucius talked about things like filial piety, the 3 submissions that women have to follow their fathers and then their husbands and then their sons and all that. And yeah, okay, so that's one aspect of Confucianism. But then 1,000 or more years later, during the Song dynasty, there are these kind of really intellectual type of intellectuals who combined those ideas with more metaphysical stuff that they got from things like the I Ching and created this kind of sense of like a kind of a more, what do we call it, not psychedelic, a more cosmically connected moral set of ideas, okay? And so the way that I like to look at it is, imagine Confucius doesn't like that you got all these kids like around making noise, and he goes, "Hey, you kids, be quiet." And the kids are like, "Why?" And he says, "Because that's what you're supposed to do." Well, that's gonna work for a while, but not all that long, okay? And then the guys by the Song dynasty are like, "Dude, this is not working. These kids are totally like driving us crazy." And then they say, "Kids, you guys gotta be quiet and behave yourselves." The kids go, "Why?" And they say, "Because good behavior is connected to the functioning of the universe, and if you don't behave, the universe is going to explode." So the kids get like, scared for a while, but then they're like, "Wait, universe? What the hell is a universe?" And they go back to being like little brat kids again. Then you got other people, they're not really necessarily these super philosopher types, but they're a lot more practical. They start looking around at things and they see the kids misbehaving and they go, "Hey kids, you guys gotta behave yourselves." The kids are like, "Why?" And they say, "Because if you don't, You're gonna be eaten by zombies! And this time the kids are like, oh, zombies! Ah! And they do it. Well, it wasn't exactly zombies, but what happened is this whole kind of world of popular culture emerged that combined Confucian morality with Buddhist ideas of karmic retribution, which basically said if you're filial, good things will happen to you. If you're not filial, bad things will happen to you. If you follow your husband's advice, good things will happen to you. If you don't follow your husband's advice, bad things will happen to you, etc., etc. And the bad things... they were really bad. So that kind of really, scared people. But the thing is, these are like, as I see it, there's like kind of three elements of Confucianism. Some core ideas from Confucius, this sort of metaphysical stuff that these real intellectual guys came up with, and then the let's get zombies to scare the crap out of people ideas that people at the more ground level came up with. But all of this combined together to create Confucianism. And if we go back in time into Vietnam, or go back and look at historical sources, we can find all of that there. If, however, we look at the stuff that's been translated into Quoc Ngu and try to find it there, then we get back into this mode again, and we can't find anything. So let's go check out a source that has not been translated, that's got all the stuff there, and so we can see Confucianism in all its glory. Let's go check it out. Okay, so let's start looking at some stuff. So if you want to understand, what role Confucianism in any form played in Vietnam in the past, you have to be able to look at texts that have information about that. And so, the stuff that's been translated into modern Vietnamese just doesn't really show that. Something like the Đại Việt Sĩ Kỷ Toàn Tu, the Dynastic Chronicle, yeah, there are bits and pieces here and there, but it isn't a text that really shows you, these ideas. For that, you have to look at texts that actually have that information. And one example is the type of text that I have here, a text from popular religion. This is a Giang Bút, an example of spirit writing, and this one is attributed to the mother goddesses, the Dao Mo, and is a text that was revealed in, I think, 1900. It's called the Minh Thiền Guocam Jungin, the true scripture in the national language for illuminating goodness. And it is written in a combination of classical Chinese and Nome, but it has here an introduction from Liu Hang, the main deity in the mother goddess religion, and in it we can see Neo-Confucianism perfectly clearly. So it starts out with this expression, it is generally said, and then there's a passage that follows it. Well, if someone starts out that way, I can tell already they're not making something up. They're telling us something that they've heard somewhere else, which means what they're saying there is probably in a text somewhere else. And there's something here about the various sages in passing on their transmissions from those before to those after have all been essentially unified, and in their hearts they've all kind of followed or upheld the same principle. So where on earth could this be coming from? Well, what you do is, or what I do, is I look at the text there and I look for expressions that look like they might come from another text, and I try to see if that is the case. In the old days, like 15 years ago, I'd be going through dictionaries. These days, you just start Googling lots of stuff and you find it. And so this final expression here, there's something about all being the same. I looked that up and voila, there it is right there. It comes from a passage in Mencius, where it's a long story, or not really a long story, but he's basically talking about two different sages, and then in distant antiquity, and then he says, when we examine those sages, both the earlier and the later, their principles are found to be the same. So this passage by Liu Hang starts out by saying that she doesn't make a specific reference to these two sages that are mentioned in Mencius or Mengzi or Mangde, but instead just kind of uses that passage to say, yeah, sages pass on information, and it's in antiquity it was all the same. But then she goes on to say, but from antiquity to the present, how is it that things have become different? And then she says, perhaps it's the case that Qi or Qi, this kind of primal essence, has sort of restricted things and made it impossible for people to return to their true natural or heavenly endowed nature. So already when I'm reading stuff like this, I'm starting to go, wood, Neo-Confucianism, because one of the ideas of Neo-Confucianism is that the scholars of Neo-Confucianism really talked about the importance of Qi or Qi, this kind of primal power that's out there. And basically what they argued was that people had a kind of natural or heavenly endowed nature, but then Qi or Qi kind of messed that up. And so what you have to do then is to cultivate yourself, cultivate your morality, so you can return to that kind of heavenly nature. So already in seeing those words, I'm kind of going Neo-Confucianism, but I'm not really sure where this is coming from, as it's just in the prose, there's no words that are really jumping out at me there. She then goes on to say that, because of this, people became different from each other, and there weren't people who sort of could understand first about this and then teach later people so that they would change. And so, let's see, 谁起后人, 后世, and ask these later people to, now here's a strange expression, to 善反之性. This is kind of rough, 求其善反之性, to seek their returning to, or their goodness returning nature. So something there is kind of messed up. I'm not quite getting what it is, but these words are kind of a clue to me that that is something that I've got to look up. And so what I would do is go to Google. Let's go to Google. That's not Google. This is Google. And then get in our Chinese here. We're gonna go Shan Fan Xing. See if we can find anything there. And what comes up? Boom! Song Dynasty, Neo-Confucianism. And we've got, Shan Fan Zhi. We've got it right there. And look at those words, Neo-Confucianism. And oh my God, there's more going on here. We've got stuff about the Qi essence, that exact same term that was in this text. We've got something about the heavenly nature. The wording is not exactly the same as what is in the text, but it's the same concept. And then we've got this concept of something like goodness returning to something, or returning goodness to something. And bingo! It's by this guy, Zhang Zai, one of the main Neo-Confucian philosophers during the Song Dynasty period. So basically, by looking at this text, kind of figuring out that something is going on there, Googling it, wham, we have hit the Neo-Confucianism bullseye. And if we look more closely at this, what we'll find is that there's this guy, Zhang Zai, this Neo-Confucian scholar, who argued that people originally had this good nature, but then this Qi or Qi kind of messes it up. And then what people have to do, he said, is to kind of Shan Fan Zhi, which is to, this is hard to translate, but kind of use goodness to return it, the nature to its heavenly origins, which is essentially another way to say you need to cultivate yourself with Confucian morality to be able to return your essence to its heavenly original form. And there's a lot of stuff that goes deeper with it, like Mencius believed that everyone was good, and then the Neo-Confucian scholars who came 1,000 years or more later were like, wait a second, not everyone is good, so you can't have that right. And then so they came up with this idea of how chi or ki messes up everything. So, mentioning Mencius first and then kind of questioning it and then having Zhang Zai's ideas later, this is just total ultra-intellectual, ultra-Neo-Confucianism, and it's being attributed to Liu Hang, the main deity of the mother goddess religion. So there's no Confucianism in Vietnam. Oh, ow, ooh, ouch, ew. It's all over the place here. And so this is basically the setup to say that, the people in the past didn't really have a way to kind of come to this understanding and educate people. They had to rely on the sages, and now these sages, the three sages, that's like Wen Shang Di Jun and these others, then delegate Liu Hang to come down and educate the people about all this stuff. So the way that this Zangbut or spear writing text is positioned is totally in this kind of Neo-Confucian philosophical worldview where they're explaining why it is that people are not morally perfect and why it is that common people or people in this world haven't been able to figure out how to change it, and why it is that Liu Hang is being directed by the powers above to come and tell people what to do. What does she tell people to do? It goes on to talk about all the basic things from the Confucianism of Confucius. You gotta be filial. Women have to listen to their husbands, their fathers, their sons, not in that order, different order, etc., etc. And it has all the ideas of popular Confucianism. If you don't do this stuff, bad stuff's gonna happen to you. Zombies are gonna eat you. No, there's no zombies, but it's the same stuff. So a text like this, when you read it in the original, when you figure out where these words are coming from, you totally see Confucianism in every form, everywhere. And this is popular level text. This is what people were coming up with at the popular level. Then they were taking this information and teaching it to the commoners who were around the temple. This is Confucianism galore at the popular level in Vietnam in 1900. Confucianism is there. It's not in the limited number of texts that have been translated into Guoknu, but it's all over everywhere else. And this stuff has it all there. Confucianism.